Hi friends, how are we doing today? My name is McChrist Doolin, and you are tuned into everything freaky and full of mystery. Here we tell stories under topics of the supernatural, downright shocking, or uncomfortably cringy, while I work on a current project from Native Crow Taxidermy and Oddities LLC. Here are a few places you could find me, like me, share me, and subscribe to my channel. I do have an Etsy shop where you could find some of my pieces, but there are some exclusive ones that are only found on my Facebook and Instagram accounts, so be sure to check those out. Today we will be working on a partial deer skull that was found in the nature. It is already damaged, and we're going to make some artificial mushrooms to place on top of it, along with some moss, and bring it to its natural beauty for an amazing piece of wall art. I find damaged pieces to be full of character and just as much potential as whole pieces. And I'd like to represent what a damaged piece is capable of becoming in this video. Now let's get into today's freaky and fascinating story. So I am super excited about this one. The category I picked from today is uncomfortably cringy, and I hope you enjoy. When I think uncomfortably cringy, the first thing that comes to my mind is something entering your body that does not belong. And the most creepy thing that I could think of is a parasite. Today, we will be talking about two different types of brain worm that can infect humans. There are many types of worms or parasites that affect the brain. Pork tapeworm, or T. solium, are a burrowing parasite that enters through the digestive tract as eggs, then hatch and navigate their way through the body, eventually reaching the brain. There is a flatworm, which lives and is contracted from fresh water in places like Brazil, Africa, and Asia. Another type of worm is found on fresh vegetation left behind by the slime of slugs. Infected slugs can leave a trail of parasites' eggs that are then consumed by humans who fail to clean vegetation prior to eating it. There's a lesson to be learned here. Always wash your vegetables. You never know what has been on them. Documented outbreaks of this infection has happened in China, Southeast Asia, and Hawaii. But the most dangerous and deadly brain parasite of them all is the brain-eating amoeba. This parasite is found in warm, fresh water, and it enters the body through the nose. How many times have you jumped into the water and accidentally snorted water up your nose? It's that easy to get infected by this single-celled parasite. It causes encephalitis, which is almost always fatal. The brain-eating amoeba is a creature you never want to encounter. Unfortunately, usually by the time you realize you have this parasite, your fate is pretty much sealed. There is very little you can do after it has made its way to your brain. After the brain-eating amoeba enters the body, symptoms will show anywhere between 1 to 18 days. However, in most cases, the symptoms will be present after only 5. Early symptoms will include headaches, confusion, and fever. Later symptoms are hallucinations, loss of balance, stiff neck, and seizures. As it progresses, it will lead to a coma and even death. After the amoeba reaches the brain, it starts to feed on cells and causes severe swelling. Most people who are affected by this parasite are children, as they often draw water up their noses when jumping in. Advising your children to plug their noses before jumping should always be practiced and encouraged when swimming in bodies of water. Thankfully, the risk of contracting this parasite are rather low. Typically, only about 10 people reportedly get it in the U.S. annually, and only 167 cases have been reported between 1960 and 2024. Of those cases, only 4 have actually survived the infection. There is a treatment plan that can give the host a fighting chance, but it has to be an aggressive and quick response to the symptoms. It involves a medication called amphotericin B, which treats primary amoebic meningoencephalitis. This is the term of the infection these nasty little parasites create on the human brain. This medication is usually rushed into the system, either through the veins or through the spinal fluid. Other medications used alongside include antibiotics and antifungal medications. However, even with quick action and all these medications, there is still such a small chance for survival against this monster. The fatality rate for this infection is over 97%. The risk lies in warm, fresh water, and it not only affects humans, but it has been known to take down many animals too in the same way. Swimming in lakes, rivers, and bodies of water should be done with caution. You never know what might be living in it and just how dangerous it can be to your health. About 13 years ago, a family visited a man-made pond for a fun swim day getaway in Arkansas. The sun was shining, the weather was nice, and the kids were eager to splash and play. They spent the day out by the water and played until exhaustion. As they went back home and everything started to wind down, the little girl of the family stated she had a slight headache. She thought that settling down and sleeping it off was all she really needed. As she lay in bed, she smiled at the memories of the fun day she had with her family, while she slowly drifted off to sleep. The next day, she woke, still having a headache that only seemed to get worse. She expressed her pain and concern to her parents, and after discussion and consideration, they decided to take her to the doctor to see what the cause may be. They went to the doctor and explained how their day went and when the symptoms started, stating that they were only getting worse. After consulting with the parents, the doctor decided to run some tests on the little girl. Waiting on the results only made the stress stronger. What could it be? The test came back with some terrifying, unfortunate news. She had been tested positive for primary amoebic meningoencephalitis, or PAM. The news was completely devastating to the family. This infection was a death sentence, and now the family had to accept the tragedy and prepare themselves for the loss of their daughter. She stayed in the hospital under a coma. The family held onto a sliver of hope that she'd one day wake again. They sat by her side, held her hand, and spent every minute with her as if it were her last. 22 long and agonizing days passed by. The little girl's parents had grown exhausted with grief and tears, but by some true miracle, she opened her eyes. Tears fell from her parents' face, but these were full of joy. She wasn't completely out of the woods yet, but the coma allowed her brain to fight back and heal. As the days progressed, improvement started to really show. She was one of only 4 survivors to overcome this infection. The memory of this experience stayed with her. As she grew up and started a family of her own, she preached the importance of nose plugs. She made it her mission to spread PAM awareness and protect other families from this terrifying, life-threatening infection. This woman is Kaylee Hardig. After learning so much about this parasite and just how dangerous it is, I too want to add to please be careful while swimming. You just never know what creatures are inhabiting the water and what they may do to you if they enter your body. Always plug your nose with your fingers or a nose plug when jumping into the water, just to be safe. I remember the first time I heard about the brain-eating amoeba. I learned about it through watching a television series called Monsters Inside Me, and it discussed all kinds of different parasitic creatures that find a human host or any animal host and feed off of it. And it describes everything that they do to the animal, to the host, and the damages that could happen, and then the treatment options that are available. But the brain-eating amoeba was one that really stuck with me. I learned about it, and it absolutely terrified me. I think I was either in late grade school or early middle school, and I refused to ever dip my head under the water after learning about this creature. And knowing what the early symptoms are and how quickly it damages your brain is even more scary to me. I was someone and still am someone who is prone to having pretty regular headaches. And I lived in a household where when I told my parents I had a headache, the response was always just take some medicine and go to bed. Never would we see a doctor for anything like that. I even got horrible migraines when I was younger, and it was always the same. So to imagine if I had this infection and tried to express concern, I would have absolutely been told to pretty much suck it up, and I definitely would not have gotten the medical help I needed. I'd be part of that 97% for sure, which kind of sucks to think about. Like I said, I first learned about this thing when I was in around middle school, and I honestly forgot about this terrifying threat that lives in the water until I started doing research on it again. Now I'm scared of water again, and if I choose to swim, I will be keeping my head well above the water and plugging my nose if I do happen to jump in. The brain-eating amoeba can only infect you through being snorted up through your nose. It cannot infect you through accidentally swallowing water. The next brain worm I will be talking about is one that finds its way into your body through ingestion. It is often transmitted through cross-contamination involving pork, or consuming raw, undercooked pork. Pork tapeworm is the most common tapeworm, and it infects people more often than you'd think. There are 2 different forms of infection from this species after it enters the body. One form is where the larvae is consumed and it inhabits the intestines of the human host. The other is when the eggs are ingested and turn into cysts, often taking hold in the brain. This parasite's primary host is a human, surprisingly, and its secondary host is actually the pig. Pigs contract this parasite through the consumption of infected human feces, and it is spread to human through the consumption of infected raw pork. It's kind of a bouncing cycle going back and forth between the pig and the human. Pigs typically show very little clinical signs from the tapeworm and act relatively normal with the infection. Humans, however, are affected much differently. The impact these parasites have on a human greatly affect their everyday lives and make it hard to focus and accomplish small goals. Pork tapeworm is capable of multiplying at rapid speeds. These worms are known as hermaphrodites, which means they do not need a partner tapeworm to reproduce. They are capable of reproducing with just themselves. And when they do this, they are capable of producing 50,000 to 60,000 fertile eggs. These cysts resemble tiny clear balloons. Cysticercosis is the term used to describe the parasite infection caused by T. solium or pork tapeworm. Cysticercosis is transmitted by consuming eggs of the pork tapeworm. After ingestion, they will hatch into larvae and find their way into the bloodstream to end up in other parts of the body like the muscles, eyes, and even the brain. Once they've moved into these locations, they will then create cysts. Once your body recognizes there's a foreign creature within, its immune system attacks in the form of cysts. The cysts range anywhere from a couple millimeters to a couple centimeters. If this immune response attacks the parasites inhabiting the brain, it can lead to seizures. The parasites and cysts cause damage, leaving holes and craters behind. However, over time, the parasites will pass and the cysts will calcify. This process is harmless to the brain, and it eventually heals. The parasites either pass on their own, if enough time passes, or in more severe cases, they are taken care of with various medications and antibiotics. These worms can live in the body for months or even years before they start showing symptoms. And the symptoms will vary depending on where in the body the worm is settling. Common symptoms people experience with having these worms include lumps that become tender to the touch under the skin, blurry vision or eye swelling if it's located in the eye, seizures, dizziness, and confusion if it has made it to the brain, and rarely abnormal heart rhythms if the worm has navigated its way into the heart. These worms can end up anywhere in your body, which can make it challenging to narrow down a diagnosis for these symptoms. The fact that it could take so long for the symptoms to even show also makes it hard to narrow the cause down. Recalling the last time you may have eaten pork and whether or not it was cooked all the way can be challenging if the event took place months or even years ago. Cysticercosis can be fatal, but it is rare. When cysts form on the brain and the spinal cord, it can get dangerous, leaving you having severe seizures or even a stroke. The best way to diagnose the cause of the symptoms is by the use of an MRI. In some cases, testing a stool sample can help with diagnosis, but it is not always the best method because the stool sample won't detect neurocysticercosis. It would only detect cysticercosis. The difference being neurocysticercosis is the infection that makes it to the brain and the spinal column, whereas cysticercosis is only an infection found in the intestinal tract. There is actually a celebrity that we all know who has dealt with cysticercosis. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was diagnosed as having cysticercosis in 2010. At first, it was suspected that he had a tumor on his brain after running through all of his symptoms. He was experiencing memory loss, cognitive issues, and brain fog. They had taken brain scans and found that he had dark spots on his brain. These dark spots they at first thought were tumors on his brain, but after doing a little more looking, they discovered that they were actually deceased parasites. He had neurocysticercosis, which describes the development of the cysts on the brain and/or spinal cord. There are no reported living parasites in his brain anymore, and he has recovered from this infection. Cysticercosis is a commonly contracted parasite infection with hundreds of cases being reported in the U.S. annually. There are treatment options available, including antiparasitic medications and steroids. While surgery can be an option, it is rarely performed as it could be more dangerous for this kind of infection. Going into the brain to remove something is always a huge risk. The brain is such a fragile and crucially important part of the living body. A good takeaway from this can be make sure pork is fully cooked and wash everything thoroughly to avoid any cross-contamination. Those are only 2 of the parasites who enter the human body and migrate to the brain, causing damage. Parasites freak me out. They can cause so much damage and go unnoticed in your body for so long. And in some cases, by the time the parasite is discovered, it is too late. Parasites will probably be a reoccurring topic in the uncomfortably cringy category for this podcast, because there are so many different kinds that we can cover and learn more and more about, and it fits the description of uncomfortably cringy so perfectly. I don't know how you guys felt during this episode, but it reminds me how gross and freaky these things can be. Parasites can pick a host at any given moment of time and feed off of it, slowly breaking it down. Oftentimes, seeking medical attention is the only way to take care of a parasitic infection. Like I had mentioned earlier when discussing the brain-eating amoeba, I definitely lived in a household where I would have otherwise been screwed if I had a parasitic infection, because we weren't people who went to the hospital for any little thing. It was always considered a little thing. Going to the hospital was always just like broken bones or a cough so bad that it ended up turning into pneumonia or something like that. But a minor headache or dizziness or what have you, it would be take some medicine, rehydrate yourself, take a nap, take it easy. Very seldom did we go to the hospital for any kind of what would be emergency. Thankfully, I have not encountered either one of these parasites, and knock on wood, I prevent myself from having to deal with that. I highly recommend that you guys do the same. Wash everything before you eat it, cook everything thoroughly before you eat it, and plug your noses before you jump into any body of water. Another worm worth mentioning in a future episode is a raccoon roundworm. It is a species-specific parasite that typically lives in the digestive tract. Humans can contract this parasite though, and it could lead to a devastating outcome as it too navigates its way towards the brain and the eyes. Because of the threat and damage it causes, Many wildlife rehabilitators I know reject raccoons. That's one of the reasons why I started volunteering with wildlife rehabilitation and rescue. I'm someone who likes to try to give every animal a second chance. Just as long as I keep clean hands and practice safe handling, I shouldn't have to worry about accidentally contracting this parasite. One thing to always remember, guys, is to wash your hands thoroughly, clean your clothes after handling, and be safe. Let me know if you guys learned anything new and fascinating today. If you guys enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like and subscribe to this channel and hit that little bell at the bottom of your screen so that you can get updates on any new uploads and keep up with these fun-filled projects that we work on together. Also, check out my Facebook and my Instagram for new project updates that I don't upload on here. And check out my Etsy shop for other projects that are available to claim for your home. Thank you again for watching. Hope to see you next time.